The climate is just so heightened right now. You have leaders, they don't know what to say, how to say it. And because it's so heightened for the person that's listening, it's like, oh, but this is what they meant. They said that, but this is what they meant. So nobody is really listening. I see kind of like this standoff. I have to be right. You have to be wrong. We would create kind of these incubators for people to express and be thoughtful or come up with ideas. Some of it was just so different that you weren't thinking about at the time, but was a value add. On the flip side of that, what I've also seen that stifles that is micromanaging, toxic work environments. But where I've seen it have the most success are those leaders that are willing to really tap into their full team, create an inclusive environment. And when employees feel they belong and that people care, and that there's authenticity, then they're more open to share. They're more open to engage, lean in. But I can't say it was me. It was really the people around me. And I've been very blessed to have folks that I can call at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, hey, I need some guidance on something. And they pick up the call.
When you look back in hindsight, everything is 2020. In hindsight, you make mistakes, we're learning from it. In hindsight, your today and your tomorrow. In hindsight, it's so much clearer now.
I'm having some technology problems too, so we're all good. We're in light company this morning. So we'll get started. But do you have any questions before we get going?
No, just I listened to some of your other sessions, and my background and your topics are related. So
Okay.
I'll just follow your lead.
Okay. We can pass the baton. Sometimes too, you can lead a little bit. You're going to be doing a lot of leading once you get going. So I looked at, I think I looked at one of yours, but you had a lot of shorts from somebody else's interview. I'm assuming. So I like your style, like your smile. So yeah, absolutely. So we should be good.
Okay. Alrighty.
All right. 1, 2, and 3. Ever wondered what it takes to steer a global brand to success while fostering a positive work culture? Today on Hindsight the Podcast, I delve into the fascinating journey of Tenia Davis, a transformative force in human resource and recruitment. And with leadership roles in iconic brands like the Oprah Winfrey Show, good gracious, and Dr. Oz, Tenia's insight into resilience and strategic excellence make her the perfect voice for today's episode. She's also the author of 8 Essential Steps to Inspire Others and Build a Thriving Workforce, which offers invaluable guidance for leaders at all levels. Good gracious. Welcome, Tenia. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Did I say your name right? I'm doing it off of my niece's name.
It's okay. It's like Captain and Tennille, so Tenia.
So it is Tenia. Gotcha.
It is Tenia.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure. Where are you calling in from today?
I am from Illinois. Well, I'm originally from California, but I live in a suburb of Chicago.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
Yeah, more Midwest Central.
How is the weather?
It's beautiful today. Absolutely beautiful. The doors are open. Nice little breeze. It's nice.
So hot here in California, so you're probably glad you're gone.
No. Listen, that's where my roots. I grew up in I was born and raised. I grew up in Long Beach.
Okay. Yeah. Right up the road. I'm in right outside of Temecula. I don't know if you've ever heard of Marietta, but a little bit south of you.
Yeah.
So this is Hindsight the Podcast, and I know we're going to talk about HR, and we're going to talk about how executives or individuals can get a strong workforce. But before we get to that, I'd like to start with you telling me a little bit about yourself, who little baby Tenia was, and how she got to be this powerful force that she is today. Now, we don't have to start at birth, obviously, but we want to get some steps, and just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, I don't know about a powerful force, but I would definitely say I'm from humble beginnings. I mean, for sure. And I think if there's any ingredients to, kind of how I formed today, I had a village, and it really takes a village. I've had wonderful people, and I say angels and mentors and guides, and so many folks in my life family members that just kind of helped usher me along and never told me that something is impossible and you can't do that. I never heard that growing up. I don't know if that's good or bad, but, it really does something for, I always say to parents, when you instill and help your children dream, the output of that is, they don't look at limitations, right? And so I
Right.
didn't see limitations. I just saw possibilities. And I was just very blessed to have people in my life that just kind of helped me navigate that. And then, of course, I learned from a lot of mistakes as well. And I think if there are any characteristics, I would say tenacity, remaining humbled, and relying on my faith, and tapping into people that are doing, or at the time was doing it 10 times better than me.
Yeah.
And so, being a journey learner, being open to what you're not comfortable with, it helps you to evolve, and it helps you to gravitate towards things, I think, a lot faster. At least for me, as I think about my trajectory, it's not just from a professional perspective, it's also personal, right? And so
Right.
I've been able to grow personally alongside the professional side. But I can't say it was me. It was really the people around me. And I've been very blessed to have, folks that I can call at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, hey, I need some guidance on something, right? And
Right.
yeah, and they pick up the call.
So did you always want to work in HR?
No, so this is really interesting. I actually started off in tech. And so
Okay.
I was working for TRW at the time, and it was systems integrated. And they were opening up kind of a HR department. And the project that we were on, I think a lot of it was timing, and they wanted to use some internal folks. And at the time, I was building out databases in a system called DBase3. If your listeners are like my age, they're like, wow. And so, I was voluntold into HR, and
Okay.
and I've been in it ever since. And I loved at the time that it was this nice combination of analytics. At the time, I was a little shy, so the interpersonal piece was starting to grow on me. But I enjoyed the different aspects of human resources, whether it's compensation and benefits, recruiting. When I joined that first HR team, they were trying to figure out how to use technology with some of the applications, and the technology pieces is where I gravitated, and that was kind of my superpower at the time.
Right.
And then I just kind of developed and morphed, and so I got the bug, and I've been in HR ever since. And it's evolved, right? And I think the reason why I've stayed in the space of human resources is more strategic now. And so there's business operations, and there's different aspects of mergers and acquisitions in which this function touches, that I find appealing and
Okay.
and challenging, and interesting.
Okay. Okay. Now, this is the hindsight part,
Okay.
right? So I need you to dig deep.
Okay.
Okay. So you started off in tech. You were voluntold to go into an HR
Mhm.
role. Can you share like a pivotal moment in your career? And it doesn't have to be this early part, right? It may be
Mhm.
later on, but a pivotal part in your career that tested your resilience, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in human resources, you see a lot and you hear a lot.
Yeah.
And there was one particular situation really, really early in my career, um, where some of the actions did not align with my values. And it was impacting a particular person. And in that moment, I realized that having the voice in the seat is so important.
Yeah.
And I was able to articulate a different view and offer a different approach, which changed the trajectory of that situation. And I knew at that time that this is where I could add value. I think a lot of times organizations have many crossroads, and sometimes just having a different voice in the room and being at the table and understanding the conversations that are shaping,
Yeah.
you can really influence the culture and the people. And I found that I was able to do that in a positive way and help others in the organization have a balanced experience.
Okay. I like how you sound HR. Right? So being a voice in the room,
Mm-hmm.
influencing the culture. Now, were you helping? And I know we can't go too deep into it, but was it a gender or a race dynamic in this situation? And how difficult was it for you? Just because you were in the room,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's difficult to speak. When things are a little off, right? Maybe a lot off. So gender, race, and then how difficult was it for you to use your voice in that moment?
It was gender and race.
Okay.
And the particular leader at the time um, just had so many different opinions and views, and it was very isolated.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so, it was kind of like I describe it as an out of body experience, because
Mm.
you're hearing and you're seeing it, but you're not reconciling like people really think this stuff.
Yeah.
And I was just starting my professional career as an executive, so this was a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started with what I knew at the time, and I started asking questions of why we were making the decisions we were making and what
Okay.
were we basing it on. And it was a risk that I took at the time. However, I stand, it was the right thing to do,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but also it was the fair thing to do.
Right.
And so, someone once told me I've had so many good mentors, but one mentor told me, because I was like so excited to be in my first executive job, and I was like, I get my little title, my little office, and, you do the little happy dance.
Yeah.
And my mentor said, just really think it through, because now that you're in this seat, you'll have a different experience and there's a different responsibility. And
Mm-hmm.
many folks will have an expectation of you in this seat. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought, oh, sure. Okay, no worries.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he was absolutely right. Because
Right.
in that moment, it could have just gone so many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's an artful way to engage folks in a conversation where people don't feel offended, but yet you're asking the right questions in a
Mm-hmm.
thoughtful way. Um, and it's interesting, fast forward to 2024, and the world is still having some of the same complexities and issues. So yeah, it's a really interesting space. Human resources, just like being a leader in any company today,
Mm-hmm.
is met with just a multitude of challenges.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. But okay. But that, I think part of that, I'm not going to, just from talking to you for the last couple of minutes, right? Just the upbringing that you had, doing the right thing, everything is possible. And then you probably had some fairness and things in there as well, prepared you for that moment. Because a lot of people can fall off to the side and err to the side
Yeah,
of,
right.
whatever the majority is that's in the room. And it takes that special courage. And I applaud you for that, because it's hard.
It is hard.
It's
Mhm.
it's really hard, because you got to think about yourself, your career, your livelihood. So, good stuff. Way to get started. Way to
However,
get
I
started.
will say this, and
Uh huh.
I've learned this along the way as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's, of course, we always think of self. However, leaders, HR, decisions you make follow you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I will say, I've seen some of the same people come cycle 3 and 4 times. So decisions you make follow you. And
Mm-hmm.
so whatever is deemed fair or unfair or right, wrong, or from whatever the viewpoint of those individuals,
Mm-hmm.
um, I learned a long time ago, it's not a matter of being liked. It's a matter of what do I want my reputation to be? And I would rather be perceived as fair than popular. And so fairness trumps popular in most situations.
Right.
For an HR practitioner, um, it's all about judgment
Mm-hmm.
and and having the courage to be the voice in the room, because you have an employee population that's depending on that, no matter their complexion or their,
Yeah.
hair color or wherever they're from.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone is expecting, and they should, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And I appreciate it. Because when you sit and think about it, what is fair? And it's defined in whoever, in
Right.
that individual
Yeah.
person, when you really sit down and think about it.
Right.
And for you, I want to know, how were you as an HR, what do you call it? Personality. Now, how were you in the HR? Were you mean?
Uh,
Were you like, you had your suit all tight? Like, how were you in that space?
oh, that's funny. Well, I grew up in corporate, so very structured.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And so, the blue, black, and brown suits.
Uh-huh, there it is.
um, and so, but I will say this, or at least how people have described me, no matter what the suit, there's a heart,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
And I have been told in my earlier start of my career, I was a little more serious. I would like to think that I've lightened up a little bit. Um, but I'm more of a listener.
Yeah.
And, my where I am today in my career, I want to leave a legacy of work and really help build strong
Mhm.
cultures where everyone can thrive. And I've always believed in that and worked
Yeah.
towards, all common goals.
Yeah, and I don't say that as a knock, the tight suit,
Right.
because what you want to do is present who you are no matter what at that moment. So people know, okay, I don't want to go to an emotional Lee. Lee is like this, even keel every time I see him, so I can really bring anything to him.
Yeah.
And people kind of come to expect that and understand that. And
Yeah.
the other beauty of it is, if you're having a bad day or something's going wrong, people notice it.
Yeah.
And your true tribe, your true village that you spoke
Yeah.
about earlier, they're gonna check in on you,
Oh, absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
So those are just some experiences from my, I try to keep things even keel, so you know where I'm at. And I think it makes it that you're more approachable.
Yeah.
HR is just, you guys have rules and regulations, and dependent on the state and the
Hmm.
county, things that you have to abide by. So you
Right.
have to be a little tight.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and it's no way to make everybody happy, right?
and
So,
yeah, so you
right.
got to fall back on the rules. I
You have to
get
be
you.
consistent, right? And
Yeah.
you have to be consistent, and you're right. There is that even tempered,
Hmm.
manner. One to listen to, you do have to dial in a little bit differently,
That's important.
and so I do still have that structured conservative side,
Uh-huh.
um, but I also operate with empathy. I also, you know,
Mm.
want to be engaging, and I would hope that I'm inspiring those around me.
I'm sure you are. Hey, so what strategies have you found effective in fostering a culture of empowerment
Mhm.
within large organizations? I guess within organizations, doesn't necessarily have to be large. You just worked in some large organizations.
Mhm.
So I put that in there.
Yeah, so I can tell you, historically, what I've seen um, really work and be successful is, having the right leaders at the table,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because empowerment means different things to different organizations. And so if you're an organization that's wanting to inspire innovation, or if you're an organization that's wanting to open the doors for autonomy, if you're an organization that really wants to tap into the authenticity of the folks around you, that
Mm-hmm.
takes a different style of leadership. One, it takes a leader that is willing to be open to listen, to provide guidance and structure. Typically, you start with, well, why are we all here? What is the mission of the organization? And does that even fit into what the organization is trying to achieve?
Right.
And if those things are aligning, then okay, how do we get that done? And so what I found is creating an open dialogue between the leader and the team is so important. And
Mm-hmm.
also making sure everybody, you would understand the mission, make sure everybody understands the mission or the task at hand and where they fit in that, right? And
Right.
then having in one organization, we would have different stand-ups and we would have, different think tanks. And so we would create kind of these incubators for people to express and be thoughtful or come up with ideas that actually I got a lot of energy from because, there was just some of it was just so different that you weren't thinking about at the time, but was a value add.
Mm-hmm.
On the flip side of that, what I've also seen that stifles that is micromanaging,
Yeah.
toxic work environments, leaders that can't be, that aren't decisive,
Mm-hmm.
that leads by division. Now, so I've seen the flip side of that as well.
Yeah.
Um, but where I've seen it have the most success are those leaders that are willing to really tap into their full team, create an inclusive environment. And
Mm-hmm.
when employees feel they belong and that people care and that there's authenticity, then they're
Mm.
more open to share. They're more open to engage, lean in. I
Mm-hmm.
remember I remember at another this one employee at another company said, I really don't understand why this particular leader keeps saying lean in. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he said, well, how can I lean in if there's a brick wall? It just doesn't make sense. And so, the environment wasn't created for that particular employee to lean in. So
Mm-hmm.
I give that example because it's important to make sure your actions align with your words.
Yeah.
If they don't, employees will tune out because they
Yeah.
then will not trust what you're saying. And so it's always interesting to me whenever I hear employees say, who they trust and who they don't trust. And I try to look at the dynamics that create that.
Right.
Sometimes it's around communication or lack of. Sometimes it's around leadership styles, not setting expectations. And I think in the workplace today, what I see is that there's an expectation for the company to also be community, and in some
Mm-hmm.
organizations, the two don't align. And then for some, it does. If it's, consumer goods, then yeah, community and company has an alignment. If it's particular other, maybe some other organizations where, it's not that sort of audience, then they might see it differently. So
Okay.
understanding, where the business is going and what the business is hoping to achieve and who are their clients, what is their market, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But if that's not established for the employees to understand, absence of information, people will bring in their own, right?
Of course. Of course.
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right, I'm going to bring this up. You've done a lot of great things. You've worked at a lot of great places. I'll put it like that. And you can tell me how great the things you've done. But how was your experience with iconic brands like Oprah Winfrey?
Wow.
And how did that shape your leadership style?
Hmm. Well, Harpo was just a land of its own, and it shaped me a lot. Tim Bennett, who was, and I always go back to Tim Bennett, who was the president at the time. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, Oprah. I mean, there's only one Oprah, so Oprah is in a land of no one can touch Oprah, but she had, I think, very smart people and good people working for her company. Tim
Mm-hmm.
Bennett, who was the president at the time. Um, his leadership style, without saying he was a servant leader, he exhibited the servant leadership characteristics. And I learned about temperament. I learned about pace. I learned about being thoughtful. I learned about, how to balance strategy with the human centric side of it. Coming from
Wow.
corporate, you just look at, I had come in from corporate, so it was bottom line, and I have my nice little suits, and they
Yeah.
were looking at me like, "What's wrong with her? Why is she wearing that?" And so,
Uh-huh.
you know, um, and so I learned a lot. And then it's really the people. I mean, I just cannot. I said this to someone else. Harpo just had this mixture of background, skills, locations, and
Yeah.
perspectives, and so you just had this strong mixture of talent where everyone was
Mm.
there to do something good. And everyone was exuding their passion
Mm-hmm.
from wherever they sat in the organization. So of course, there's the Oprah brand itself. But I learned a lot from the people that were there, from the producers, from the team, the team that I led. I learned from the people that were there, from the different initiatives and things that we did. I feel I was learning something every day. If it wasn't about what was on, what was shared to all of you, it was all I was learning about myself. And it was just a great place to learn and grow and be curious. And
Okay.
I think when you have curiosity, especially in the professional space, it opens you up to be open. And then that allows others around you to show up and do their best work. And actually, when I was in school for my PhD, my dissertation, my study was around servant leadership. How do servant leaders influence organizations, and those folks that they influence, are they able to carry on that learning to other institutions? And if so, how does that manifest? And I saw a lot of people transform, right? And
Yeah.
so I think Harpo, it was really because of the leaders. It takes
Yeah.
leaders matter.
Right.
It truly matters. And when you have folks that they might not get you, but they are open to understanding and allowing you to grow and develop and be your best self, and that's outside of who they are,
Right.
that's a great leader.
What led you to Harpo?
It was interesting because I didn't apply for a job. I was actually introduced through someone else for a project, and
Yeah.
I had not worked in media entertainment before. However, I had come from the corporate side, and um, I was asked to join and work on a project, and from there it just spiraled, and um, I was then asked to lead the HR function.
Okay.
And it was an exciting journey. And again, it really, when I think about the people I worked with, even on the team, I think Julie said, "Hey, we're doing life together." And I was like, I never thought about that. There were marriages, there were divorces, there were kids, there were, all these different things. And, I still talk to Michelle and Kim and Tiffany, and it's just really interesting how the relationship, you really felt you had a friendship within the incubator. And I still keep in
Nice.
contact, of course, with so many folks. And, I would say Harp was one of those places where it's 10 years later, someone will call and say, "Hey, can you help me out with something?" And you're just like, "Yeah." And you just pick up the conversation.
Yeah,
Like it
yeah,
was
yeah.
10, it's like that. Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a good experience. For me, it was a great experience.
I know that's right. So you spoke a little bit about your education, your PhD, but how did your education at Loyola, right, Loyola University of
Mhm.
Chicago,
Yes.
and your PhD in values-driven leadership, how did that influence your professional journey? You gave one example. You worked at Harpo, but
Yeah.
yeah, how did that? And I hear a lot of themes. Your dissertation on servant leadership. Did that all of that build up, all of that knowledge, all of that socialization and experience, did that help with your book? And we'll talk about that a little bit too.
Yeah, it did. For the most part, I truly believe that leaders want to be good leaders. I truly believe that,
Of
right?
course.
I
Yeah.
think a lot of times in organizations, we promote people in positions because technically they have the chops, right? However, we don't always equip them to lead. And so, I know there's always the question: Are leaders born? Or are they developed? I do think that people can be developed, and I do think people can change, and do think that people evolve, right?
Right.
So the servant leadership is, having witnessed and being part of such a wonderful experience of how that sort of leadership really influences and has such an impactful um, uh, output on people. I was just really intrigued by that. And um, in my career, I have witnessed horrible leadership, right? And so
Yeah.
the impact of that as well. And so my thought in writing the book and just really trying to understand, servant leadership, people think is really soft, and it's not. Um, but I thought if I could from an academic perspective, research the phenomena of is this really a leadership style that adds value to a business.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to see what that would yield. And in the book, taking all the wonderful stories that I've witnessed and heard from my peers, I kind of just captured all of that in a book to say, listen, these things happen, yet here are some steps and some techniques that you can use so that it will help you be a better leader or continue to
Okay.
strengthen your leadership skills. And so I wanted to, of course, storytelling, there's a lot of power in storytelling,
Mm-hmm.
but also offer, just kind of 2, 3, 4 steps. Sometimes people just say, okay, what do I need to do? How do I say it?
Mm-hmm.
And so in that particular book, I wanted to at least introduce the concept of servant leadership in the workplace and having servant leadership, how does it help the business and how does it help those leaders?
Mm.
My follow-up book, which comes out in 2 months, is actually a follow-up to the first book, and it's all about feedback. That
Mm-hmm.
is like the number one thing leaders avoid
Mm-hmm.
is giving feedback. And so from the
Yeah.
first book, I received so many kind notes. Some were, Tenia, never thought about this. At first I went into reading it thinking La La Land. And, so
Yeah.
I had some really fun, notes sent to me. And then,
Uh-huh.
I had a lot of questions just around feedback. And I thought, wow, so I followed up with the second book is only on feedback, but I approached it more from constructive insights and it kind of built out that model to
Mm-hmm.
help leaders approach conversations in a thoughtful way. And what I'm hearing from, you know, uh, my circle of folks is, the climate is just so heightened right now. You have leaders, they don't know what to say, how to say it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and because it's so heightened, for the person that's listening, it's like, oh, but this is what they meant. They said that, but this is what they meant. And, so nobody is really listening. And, I see kind of like this standoff. I have to be right. You have to be wrong.
Yeah.
Or, there's this standoff in these different groups. And it's just, I just want to say quiet the noise. And
Mm-hmm.
in this book, I literally just said, look, we are all right to some degree, but let's look at how do we get to the middle and
Mm.
change our vocabulary. Instead of me versus you, it's us, we, and how can we find common ground? And I think we've lost as, humanity, we've lost how to find human ground.
Yeah.
And so when I hear human relationship issues, it's around no one's trying to establish the common ground. They're trying to, I'm
Yeah.
right, you're wrong.
Yeah. Yep.
Let me take all this energy to show how you're wrong. And it's destructive, right?
Right.
And so, and it's really not smart business. And so the second book is artfully, I just tried to create, if you're giving feedback, here's a process, or, and I gave
That's
examples.
good.
And I created a little cheat sheet for leaders. And I just
Mm-hmm.
kind of pulled together all the things that I do every day into a book so that, you don't have to read 500 pages. You can kind of go, hey, it's a performance review. Everybody hates performance reviews. Employees hate them. Managers hate
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Everybody hates. It's that one time of the year and everybody's holding their seat like, oh, what are they going to say to me? What are they going to tell me?
Right.
Instead of if we teach the art of communication and conversation along the way, you shouldn't have an end of year, heart attack about what somebody's going to say to you, right?
Right.
And that doesn't create growth anyway. And so I
Mm-hmm.
just kind of share just some thoughts based on my experience around feedback and engaging conversations so that, there's not a point in time where it's an event.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not what feedback should be. It should be an ongoing conversation and how to create that
Okay.
and find the right rhythm. And different leaders do it differently, but I tried to create a little cheat sheet of what I've seen in my career work and share stories of what did not work and
Okay.
provide a roadmap for folks.
All right. So let's go back to 8 essential steps to inspire others
Okay.
and build a thriving workforce. Can you highlight like one of the essential steps from your book and explain its significance?
I would say mentoring,
Okay.
because in the workforce today, what I see is that we have a population that wants to be mentored, that wants to be developed. And that is the one area where I really see leaders just fail. And so what happens is that, they're leading their day-to-day technical side of the job. You have a new employee, they onboard, they go through orientation, they're excited, they have their
Yeah.
little, branded items. But then it's, in some organizations it stops. And so what I've heard is that's in that first 90 days, that's when the employee will decide if they stay or if they go.
Right.
And the mentoring aspect has just become so much more of a conversation of how an employee feels they are learning and growing. And so whether it's directly or indirectly, when you say mentoring, some people automatically go to a formal process, and it's not really a formal process all the time. Sometimes it's just making sure that someone understands this is the process, this is the flow, and this is why, right? But you're setting them up for success. So the mentoring aspect, I think is an area that I've seen organizations really struggle with. And it tends to be the greatest need that I'm seeing in organizations today.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I tell you what, as a leader, um, that was something that I struggle with and probably still struggle with the onboarding process. I've hired a few people recently, and each time I try to get better at it. I try to be more in tune to the person, and also be in tune with work. Get that balance,
Right.
right? But I think Tania's got some things that I haven't thought about yet. So make sure that you get a copy of that book. So how can leaders like myself, how can we implement the principles from your book in our daily management practices?
Yeah. So I would say don't tackle everything at one time, because everything might not
There you go.
apply to you, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I would say start with what I would say mission critical, right? If you're a strong communicator, then, you're not going to start there. If, like, to your point, if it's the mentoring aspect, then I would say start where the need, where
Yeah.
different view. And that
Okay.
different view is what will help us to evolve, right? I might
Yeah.
think I communicate extremely well, and someone else that's hearing me might say, she talks really fast. She needs to slow it down, right? And if I don't
Yeah.
have that feedback, and I think sometimes as leaders, we sell short the feedback from the team. The feedback from the team is really important, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and gaining that feedback, I think it's important to understand what are their expectations. And as we are developing, we're developing in a way that really makes sense for the team, yourself, and the organization.
Okay.
Yeah.
I tell you what, when I convey a message, I want you to do, hey, Tania, I need you to do this. And I have a vision of what I want you to do, but you do something totally different. And this is an evolution of thought, right? Mindset shift. What I start to do, if you don't do what I'm anticipating you to do, one, I look at what you did,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm like, either, I didn't even know you could do it that way, right? One, so curious.
Right.
The other way is, how can I better convey that message? How can I better communicate what it is that I need done?
Mm-hmm.
I rarely go to a judgmental
Mm-hmm. Right.
look when that happens, because I always have to look at myself first. I obviously didn't communicate that.
Mm-hmm.
What am I missing?
Right.
So how powerful do you think just internalizing and self
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the words. You know all the words, you write the books. I just know what I do, right? But how do you feel about that when you look into yourself first
Mm-hmm.
before you start pointing fingers and judging?
Oh my gosh. So this is a pet peeve of mine. So self-awareness is so critical for leaders, I think for
Mm-hmm.
any professional. And lack of self-awareness, I think, creates barriers and obstacles. it's very important to have self-awareness. And I've seen in organizations where lack of self-awareness creates a very toxic environment, right? And so it's like the person in the room that talks over other people and, not aware that they're talking over other people, right? And so if you have a
Right.
room full of women, then they will interpret that as, you just keep talking over me. I don't, I'm here. I'm not invisible, right? And then, those employees say, hey, do you realize you talk over me? And the person's like, no, of course I don't. I'm just passionate. Okay. And so, that's an example, but it happens often, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, doing a pulse check and hitting pause saying, hey guys, are we using the same vocabulary? Am I connecting or what am I missing? And I think when a leader says, what am I missing? It opens the door for people to feel they can engage with you versus, I need you to do it my way. I've seen situations where leaders only want it done their way because they don't want to learn. And so I'm always curious when I go into organizations of what the culture is and what they are evolving people towards versus opening the doors for change. And where I've seen organizations, I call it passively resist to change, is they're not open to looking in the mirror. And so what happens is, I'm always curious when I hear people say, it's just not a fit in the culture. Really? Well, what does that mean? And so, it's really, I'm not going to change. I want you to change to where I am today. And so, and so not having that sort of awareness, the workforce is checking out. They, what I hear from folks is they don't want to put the energy and time into that sort of action. And, people want to show up and be authentically who they are. And so, back in the day, conforming, assimilations, and all that fun stuff, people don't see that as fun, nor do they want to participate. So they want to show up. If they have pink hair, they want to, rock that pink style and contribute their best work, right? And so, if organizations aren't open to that, or if there's no sort of self-reflection of where the organization is or where that leader is, then individuals that are comfortable with where they are, they won't stay.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
So that's what I see. And so, self-awareness is, especially for leadership, it is critical. And not having that, I think it robs the staff of being their best, and it robs the organization of getting the best out of the staff. So, leadership today is really interesting. All leaders are not equal.
And I tell you what, sometimes you go in and you do that self-reflection and you realize that, okay, I was absolutely correct. Like, it's not always that you're wrong.
Yes, absolutely.
But you absolutely need to take the time out and assess yourself, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
You made a good point. You said some leaders aren't willing to learn. I remember we were in the military. So I was probably in some leadership school. I can't remember exactly where I got this messaging from. But they spoke just what you talked about. Like, hey, if I need private to go over here and move rocks from A to B, just say, hey, move rocks from A to B, right? And then watch. Because in the Army, there's such a diverse group of individuals, different experiences. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
And you'll be like, oh my Lord, I did not know that we could levitate those rocks, whatever, right? Like, how did you do that? Right. So whatever it is, and you can learn some new things.
Right.
But the other side of that is, and I used to tell my people anyway, I say, hey, look, I'm going to tell you something to do. I'm going to be kind of vague. I'm not going to just say, 1, 2, 3, 4, step by step, right?
Right.
I want you to figure it out on your own so that you can learn and you can grow and understand different experiences. So there's a good little balance there.
And you're right about that too, because and once you open the door for it to build that rapport with them, when you are in the space of, look, guys, it's just we have to do 1, 2, 3, 4. They're more apt to follow you and trust you. Right.
Absolutely.
And so if you haven't built that muscle on the team or with your peers or wherever you are in the organization, then they will question when you give the directive. They will question you, and it takes longer to get the work done.
Doesn't it?
Right?
Doesn't it? All right, you talked a little bit about the future. So can you discuss any like future trends in HR that you believe will be significant in coming years?
Oh, wow.
And are you still operating in the HR space?
I am. I'm still
Oh,
operating in.
okay. Okay. I want to make sure you still got your finger on the pulse.
I still have my finger. I'm just in different lanes for many things. I'm living my best life.
I know that's right.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things shaping. I'll start with people first.
Mm-hmm.
I think organizations that realize people matter in a way, that if you don't have people, you can't get the job out the door.
Mm-hmm.
But I think how we support a workforce will change, because the dynamics are just it's just so much stronger. People are coming into the workforce with many different social backgrounds, concerns. And
Yeah.
I see the landscape of benefit packages changing. AI is changing HR.
Ooh.
And, also how we recruit and retain
Mm-hmm.
is changing, and how companies retain their employees. And so, those are just like headliners. But I think when
Right.
I see those articles, or when I'm in conversations, or when I'm in think tanks and things like that, there's always an aspect that I have to circle people back to, and that's leadership. If we don't develop the right leaders to lead the workforce for today and the future, then it's kind of that old saying: people don't leave the company; they leave their manager. And so,
Mm-hmm.
I think at some point we there are some companies that do a phenomenal job,
Mm-hmm.
and there are some that just kind of hope it happens. Or I'm always curious when organizations say they just weren't a fit, or it just didn't
Yeah.
work out. And again, not looking in that mirror of maybe something should be entertained of how we lead.
Right.
Right. Or the person is a great subject matter expert, and I think sometimes organizations hope that they change and evolve. And so what happens is that when you exercise managing one leader one way, and you manage the other leader a different way, it teaches the organization there's a higher premium of value of one over the other. And whatever the
Mm-hmm.
optics are, that takes on a landscape of its own that creates distrust. And so there are a lot of emotional and behavioral things that are impacting the workplace that I think organizations should really focus on, because the behavioral pieces, that's like the water cooler conversations that take
Right.
place. And
Right.
by the time, I always say, if you don't have a pulse, or if there's a different view from the leadership wing to the staff wing,
Mm-hmm.
then, somebody's not paying attention, right? And so,
Yeah.
so I think there are many complexities that the workforce will continue to face. And, not even talking about the political realm of what will change laws and what will shape how companies operate, that, I think companies are thinking about today.
Right. All right, Tenia. I asked you a few questions. And this is an AI generated question that I'm about to ask you right now.
Oh, no. Okay.
I'm just playing. Is there some you mentioned AI in the landscape and all that.
Yeah.
Is there something that you like to talk about that we haven't covered yet?
No, you know what? I would like to say one thing. When we end the conversation, I would love to, and I've done this in a couple of the podcasts because it's so important to me. I really would like to leave a challenge, a charge to your listeners. And so it's not a question, it's just more so, how do we want to show up in the world? And I truly believe if one or two people can incite negativity, I have to believe that one or two can inspire positivity. And so I would like, to ask your listeners, what will they do and how will they inspire positivity, even if it's one thing at a time. I love the whole Starbucks, and I've even tried it. I saw it on one of their websites. You buy the person behind you a cup of coffee, and then you challenge them to do the same. And it sounds quirky and funny, but if you're that person standing in line getting free coffee, you're like, hey,
Yeah.
thank
Yeah.
you, right?
Yeah.
And then you pay it backwards. And so I think as humanity, we have such an opportunity to show up differently, or the same, whoever is sitting in what a seat, and contribute something positive to leave our kids. And so that if there's any mission that I would like to contribute to, it's that.
You made me think of something really quick. I was in uniform and I went to go get something to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went to get up and pay, they said, "Hey, someone already paid for it."
Wow.
I was like, "They do that?" Right? I didn't know that. You know what I mean? So I was in Pennsylvania at the time, but I was like, "They do that?" And then that inspired me.
Yeah.
So one time I went in to eat. It was actually it was an older lady.
Uh-huh.
She was sitting there and she was eating by herself. Probably, looked about 70s, 80s, and she was eating by herself. And so I went up to the hostess and I said, is she alone? And they
Mm-hmm.
said, yeah. And I said, okay, take care of her meal. And then I just
Yeah.
walked out.
Wow.
It's crazy, right? That's so
Yeah.
impactful.
It
You don't go out
is.
and seek the recognition, especially from that
Right.
person. But what it does is it inspires them, right?
Absolutely.
To go and she probably did a whole lot of good stuff in her life, right? Hopefully that was the hope, right?
Right.
But hopefully that encouraged her to continue to feel that
Yeah.
urge and that desire to do good with her people.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be anything
Mm-hmm.
grand or big or,
No.
I think the world is just, we hear so much of the pain. We hear the pain.
Yeah.
We hear, everything that's going wrong. We see it on the news. However, I have to believe if that sort of vibrato creates what we see, there has to be, another side of that
Mm-hmm.
creates something different. I have to believe that.
I really do love people and the spirit of people because I believe inherently people are good. What really made me fall in love with people
Mm-hmm.
was because I'm from Maryland,
Uh-huh.
and there was a plane crashed into the Potomac River, I believe it
Oh,
was,
okay.
and it was in the middle of winter.
Yeah.
And so the helicopters were out there and they were picking people out of the water. And
Uh-huh.
this one lady, she was struggling,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's freezing waters in the middle of winter.
Mm-hmm.
And she was just too cold, too weak.
Mm-hmm.
And she started to go under. And this guy, and I'm about to tear up now because every time I think about it, every time I see it,
Mm-hmm.
it just, I fall in love with people, right?
Mm-hmm.
This random guy just walking, seeing what was happening, just jumped into the water.
Mm-hmm.
And he got her. He didn't know her,
Mm-hmm.
but he knew she needed him. There's a lot of people standing on the sideline just watching, probably going to watch this lady die,
Right.
right? He jumped in, and I fell in love with people at that moment, and I'm tearing up now. So anyway, bottom line is, Tenia, I'm with you on that challenge.
Yeah.
I'm going to see if I can do more
Yeah.
in that space to just promote goodwill,
Yeah.
to my fellow people.
All
So
right. I love
I
it.
love it.
Yeah.
I love it too. Hey, and how can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your work?
So I do have a website,
Mm-hmm.
theleadershipwise.com.
That's a nice
I'm also
website.
on Instagram. Huh?
I said it's a nice website. Go
Oh, thank you.
ahead.
Thank
Uh-huh.
you. And I also have an Instagram,
Mm-hmm.
and I, try to post up something positive every day to contribute to all the things that I believe in. And of course, I have a day job, and I'm on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, Instagram, and my personal website.
All right, cool. What's your Instagram?
The Leadership Wise.
So it's all the same.
Yeah, I was very creative with that one.
Hey,
The
you
same.
you got that tight suit. No, I'm just
That's
playing.
right. Hey, it's hanging in the closet.
Hey, but thank you, Tenia,
Thank
so
you.
much for sharing your incredible journey and insights with me today.
Thank you.
And I've learned about the importance of resilience, strategic change, management, and fostering a culture of empowerment. Your book, 8 Essential Steps to Inspire Others and Build a Thriving Workforce, offers invaluable guidance for leaders everywhere. And to the listeners, stay tuned and subscribe to Hindsight the Podcast so you won't miss any episodes. And thank you for joining us. And don't forget, Tenia has a new book coming out in 2 months.
Yes.
All right. So make sure that you check in on that and get that and learn about feedback. It's very important.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for joining me here on Hindsight the Podcast. I'm your host, Lee Jones. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I know I did. And while I have you here, why don't you take your mouse, go over and click on that subscribe button? No, not right there. Over to the right. No, down, right there. Boom. Thank you. Now, thank you for subscribing to Hindsight the Podcast. I'm your host, Lee Jones.